Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. It's starting to come back to me, slowly, bit by bit. I don't know if it was opening up about my grandma's other bedtime story that did it, or the fact my wife finally persuaded me to try counseling. But whatever the reason, the memories are returning. Memories from my childhood, memories of grandma, memories of the stories she used to tell me before I went to sleep. See, I always knew there were others. Other tales that scared me when I was little. But the time before I was a teenager is like a dark landscape. Only a few small patches are lit up. It's getting clearer now, though. The shadows that litter that black land are finally being forced to retreat. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to see what they've been hiding. I must have been around 7 years old when Grandma told me about the special knock. I was tucked up in bed at my parents' first house, in my little room at the back at the time. Grandma was perched by my feet. I'd been crying. I don't know what upset me, but I remember my eyes blurring and my nose running. I remember probing a cut in my lip, touching it over and over again with my tongue. I remember the frown on Grandma's face, a look that was half concern, half something else. After she'd grabbed a tissue for me and wiped my face, she got up and walked away from the bed, wandered over to the cupboard on the opposite side of my room. I remember that cupboard well. Before we moved to our second home, that cupboard was the source of many sleepless nights for me, many nightmares. I used to imagine all sorts of things about it. I'd lie awake, sometimes for hours, and I'd have to keep peeking my eyes open to check the cupboard door was still closed, to make sure it was shut tight. See, whenever my eyes were closed and I heard a creak somewhere in the house, I'd imagine it was the cupboard door. That something on the far side was trying to open it, ever so softly, so it could come and get me while I slept. I'd never told anyone about this fear. Even at 7 years old, I knew it was stupid. Baby stuff. But as I watched my grandma stop in front of the cupboard and lean her wrinkled cheek against the wood, I felt myself growing tense all the same, even though the lights were on. Even though there was an adult in the room with me. And when Grandma closed her eyes and started whispering, I had to fight back the urge to shout for my parents. Grandma? I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Grandma, what are you doing? For a few more seconds she didn't respond, just kept her eyes closed and kept muttering. Then, abruptly, she turned to face me again, smiled, and when she came back and resumed her usual position at the foot of my bed, I knew it was story time. Did I ever tell you about the special knock, sweetheart? I shook my head. No. Well, maybe I was waiting until you were a bit older. The special knock can be wonderful. It can lead you to see things you wouldn't even be able to conjure up in dreams. But it can also be, well, dangerous. Grandma glanced away from me, towards the bedroom door. Maybe it's one for another time, in fact. I really should be getting home to see your grandfather, and I wouldn't want to scare you. She started to get up from the bed, but I stopped her. No, don't go, Grandma. What's the special knock? Grandma's blue eyes twinkled. She hovered where she was for a moment, then sat back down. The special knock is an old trick a friend of mine taught me when I was younger, she began. Not everyone can do it, and not everyone would want to do it. You have to be brave and careful and, well, special. Grandma smiled at me. Like you. As I watched her, she reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pulled out 2 boiled sweets. Passed one to me. I'd already brushed my teeth, and I knew Mum would kill me if she caught me eating sweets before bed. But this was my time alone with Grandma. Mum was downstairs with Dad. She'd never know. I unwrapped the sweet and popped it in my mouth, feeling the sticky mint wash over my tongue. The cut in my lip stung slightly, but I ignored it. When Grandma next spoke, she'd lowered her voice. When I was over by your cupboard door just now, I was using the magic words. Secret words that only a few other people know. Do you know what those words do? I shook my head. They turn a door into a window. A sort of gateway. The thing is, sweetheart, this place you spend your days in, this house where you live, and the building you go to school in, and the town you visit with your mother at the weekends, it's not the only place. There are other places, too. And if you use the special knock on that cupboard door of yours now that I've whispered the magic words to it, you'll see them. You'll be able to see those other places for yourself. I stared at Grandma, concentrating on her words, absorbing them. Mint flooded my mouth, but I forgot to swallow. Now listen to me very carefully, Grandma continued, because this is the important bit. The way you open the window is by doing the special knock, but you have to get it right. 7 knocks on the door, that's what you'll want. 7 knocks. No more, no less. Then you open it. You won't be able to step through, but you'll have one heck of a view, all right. I swallowed. A view of what? I don't know its real name, but the woman who taught me the special knock had her own name for it. She called it the lunar plane. 7 knocks takes you to the lunar plane. I could try and describe it to you, sweetheart, but I honestly don't think I could do it justice. You just have to see it for yourself. All I'll say is it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And trust me, I've seen plenty. Grandma plucked the sweet wrappers up from the duvet, put them back in her pocket. She put her hands on her legs, as if bracing herself to stand. Then she paused. How many knocks did I say? 7, Grandma. That's right, 7. Don't forget it, either. If you get the wrong number, and then open the door. She glanced across at the cupboard and frowned. Well, just make sure you don't get the wrong number, okay? Okay, Grandma. And will you make me a promise? What? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13, or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door. Okay, don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. The last thing you want is to open a gateway to the Blacklands. I felt icy fingers down my back. I glanced across at the closed cupboard door, in the shadows at the far end of my bedroom. What's the Blacklands? Grandma stood up and wandered over to me, leaned down and gave me a kiss. You don't want to know, she whispered. I spent the next week avoiding the cupboard. I didn't go anywhere near it. Tried not to even look in its direction. Did my best to push Grandma's story as far out of my mind as I could. It wasn't easy. Whenever I was alone in my room and the house was silent, I'd feel it. A sort of pull. Like when someone tells you not to look at something, and suddenly all you want to do is take a quick peek. The feeling was sort of like that, but it was different too. Stronger. Sometimes, when I was lying in bed at night, I'd feel the cupboard almost like a weight in my mind. A heavy, static energy. It made me restless, made me want to scrunch up my fists and grit my teeth. When I turned away from the cupboard, my skin itched. Like the pores had tiny, invisible bugs in them. It made it hard for me to sleep. And when I did sleep, I had dreams. Sometimes the dreams were pleasant, floaty ones. I'd dream I was on a cloud, hovering through multicolored planes of light, flying through an endless sea of stars. I'd wake from these dreams feeling happy and safe, like how I felt when Mum hugged me and stroked my hair. But other times I had nightmares. The nightmares I had during that week were the worst I ever remembered having in my life. Horrible, half-glimpsed blurs. Images I'd wake from with a scream lodged in my throat, my sweat-soaked pajamas sticking to the skin of my back. At the time, I didn't remember the nightmares themselves. At least not completely. But every time I woke from one, I was left with the same fading image. An image of myself surrounded by thick, choking blackness. Dense shadows everywhere. I couldn't see a thing, but I had the sense that I was standing at the center of a vast open space. Wind howled around me. Sounds echoed. I wanted to open my mouth and yell for help, but I couldn't bring myself to, because I knew I wasn't alone. It was a week after Grandma's story that I used the special knock. It was a Saturday night, and my friend from school, Tim Jacobs, was round. We were having a sleepover. It's been a long, long time since I last saw Tim, but I can still picture him. Even though he was a month younger than me, I always remember him looking older. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with green eyes and messy blonde hair. A half-smirk permanently on his face. Tim was one of the most popular kids in our year, and in normal circumstances, he wouldn't have had anything to do with me. But our dads were friends from way back, and we'd known each other our whole lives. As Tim often liked to remind the kids at school, he was forced to hang out with me. When are you going to get a TV in your room? Or a computer? Tim sat in his pajamas, slumped in the chair by my desk. He was fiddling with my desk lamp, switching it on and off. His face lit up with light, then disappeared, then lit up again. This wasn't the first time Tim had asked me a question like this. Whenever we had sleepovers at my house, he spent the whole time moaning about my lack of stuff. No TV, no computer, no PlayStation. I had board games and I had books, but that was about it. And Tim had no interest in those things. You know my mum won't let me, I muttered back. It was 10 p.m., and we were both speaking in half-whispers. We'd been told to go to sleep at 9 p.m., and Mum had already been up to give us one warning for talking. I knew from past experience that one warning was all you wanted to get. Mum had a short fuse, and she wouldn't be above grounding me if I wasn't careful. I knew we were safe if we kept our voices low, though. Mum and Dad were both downstairs in the lounge, watching TV. Some film. The faint, tinny sound of laughter drifted upstairs every now and then. As long as we weren't too loud, they wouldn't hear us. I glanced warily at Tim, who was still fiddling with the lamp. He was in a restless mood. He'd been silent and sullen most of the evening, rolling his eyes whenever I suggested stuff for us to do. Bad signs. From knowing him so long, I knew he could get reckless when he was bored. Reckless and mean. "You know what I think," said Tim now, keeping his eyes on the lamp. He was talking slowly and carefully, punctuating his words with a flick of the lamp switch. "What I think? Switch. Light. Is that your mum? Switch. Dark. Is a bitch. Switch. Light." He put extra emphasis on bitch, savoring the bad word. The adultness of it. Then he stared across the room at me, fixing his green eyes on mine. I felt my own eyes prickle, and suddenly had to fight to hold back tears. I looked away from Tim, and my eyes found the cupboard. "I know what we could do," I said suddenly. Tim followed my gaze. "I'm not playing any more of your stupid board games," he said. "That's kids' stuff." "No, this isn't board games. This is a secret, I caught myself. A secret someone showed me." "Yeah? What secret?" Tim's voice still had an edge to it, but at the same time, I could tell I'd caught his interest. This was my best tool when Tim was in a bad mood, distraction. If I argued or disagreed with him, he'd only make fun of me more. But if I could get his mind on something else, I might be okay. "So basically there's this special knock someone taught me," I said now. "If I do a special knock on that cupboard door, then open it, we'll be able to see something really cool." Tim rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. No, really? A witch taught me how to do it. She cast a spell on the door. And now I can take us anywhere we want to go just by knocking on it." Tim stood up from the chair by my desk. The lamplight spilled over his face. His expression was half smirk, half scowl. "That's the dumbest thing I ever heard," he said. "It's dumb even for you. How about instead of knocking on the door, I knock on your head a bunch of times? How about that?" He took a step towards me, and I panicked. "Well, if you're too scared to try it, I'll understand." This was a big risk, and I knew it. But as soon as the words were out, Tim paused. "Why the hell would I be scared? I'm not scared of nothing." I shrugged. "Well, the spell the witch did is dangerous. Really dangerous. Like, if we get the number of knocks wrong, and I do more than I should, we could go someplace bad." Tim glanced across at the cupboard door, then looked back at me. His face was hard to read. "Wait, so how many knocks is it meant to be then?" "7, I said quickly. "7 takes us to this awesome place. But the witch told me that if we get the knocks wrong, especially if we get close to 13, or something like that, then the door opens someplace different. Someplace scary." Tim was no longer scowling. He looked across at the cupboard door again, a slight frown on his face. After a few more seconds, he shrugged his shoulders. "Okay, go on then. Let's try it." The brief wave of relief I felt was extinguished as soon as I turned to the cupboard door. It stood a few feet away from me, just outside the glow of the desk lamp. In the shadows, it seemed stupid to think that the cupboard wasn't anything more than just a cupboard. Baby stuff. But then again, as I looked at it, I remembered the dreams I'd been having all week. The nightmares. And Grandma's words from the previous weekend floated back to me. If you get the wrong number, and then open the door. Grandma hadn't had her storytelling face on when she'd warned me about getting the number wrong. She'd had her serious face on. I was sure of it, as though she really meant what she was saying. And what was it she'd said about 13 knocks? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13, or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door. "Okay, don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side." I shivered. Still, that was alright, wasn't it? I'd just have to make sure I only knocked 7 times. I'd count as I went. Easy peasy. I pulled in a deep breath, and stepped towards the cupboard. Felt Tim's eyes on me. From downstairs, at the edge of my hearing, I caught laughter floating up from the lounge. "It's okay," I told myself. "Your parents are just downstairs. And besides, nothing's really going to happen, is it? Grandma can't really turn doors magic." "Get on with it," said Tim. "If you're going to do your special needs knock, or whatever the hell it is, then do it, okay? Don't just stand there." I ignored him. By now I was directly in front of the cupboard door. I could feel that tingle again, too. That pressure. Beneath my pajamas, my skin was all goosebumps. It might only have been the slight chill in my bedroom, and nothing more than that. But then again I knew it was more than that. I could feel it in my mind. A heaviness that was like the start of a headache. A pull behind my eyes. As I reached up and made my right hand into a fist, it felt like I was no longer in control of my body. Knock. I struck the wood with my fist, softly. The sound was dull and hollow. Knock. I felt Tim at the edge of my vision, moving up beside me. Knock. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint sound. Knock. At first I thought it was noise from the TV downstairs, but knock. Then I thought it might be coming from outside my bedroom window, and knock. Then it sounded as though it was all around me, and knock. Finally, as my fist struck the door for the 7th time, I realized what the sound was, a whistle. A faint low hum, coming from inside the cupboard. The echo of my final knock faded, melting into the noise beyond the door. My skin tingled. I stepped forwards, almost in a trance, my hand reaching for the doorknob. And then I felt myself shoved to one side as Tim pushed past me. Bang! 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 Before I had a chance to stop him, or even so much as call out, Tim had thumped his fist against the door 6 more times, making the total number of knocks 13. Beyond the cupboard, the whistling sound stopped. Tim reached out and gripped the doorknob. Looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my door frame. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule. Only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah, about 5 seconds ago." "Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk, and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" The other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans, and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the 2 strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules, besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there." She pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour, but we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "We never know when it's coming." "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why. I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. I don't believe you. The girl shrugged. You don't have to. You'll see for yourself. The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. We'll come back later, Gianna said matter-of-factly. We'll show you. Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine, and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor, next to the window, and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated, or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. Do you all live in this building? I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. Yeah, Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. This building is where all the young people live. It's where they put us, Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. We've all been sorted out. Forgive her. She's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. It's not a theory, she snapped, glaring at him. Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers. People with kids, but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building. May, tell him. So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she'd tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. Stop it, May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. You'll scare her. I'm not scared. She just shrugged at me, as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around, and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit, it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Matteo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet, and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. Do not interfere. It's coming, Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Matteo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There was again that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something, or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there, unmoving, for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. Help, please, my God, someone help me. Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm there was actually someone out there like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. Please, I'm hurt. I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. What is this? I demanded loudly. What the hell is this? May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. Arden, please. We have to help him. Why can't we help him? He's just an old man. We can't help him. Trust me. I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now, facing our building. His head was tilted upwards, and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. Help me, he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human, or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn, and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms, or I should say his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shrieks slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. Please, 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 please. May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass, and yelped in pain and horror. What is that thing? I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. We don't know, May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him, like he might topple over. We just know to follow the rules. What happens if you don't follow the rules? I asked, and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. Do you want to tell her, or should I? Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl. Shannon, Gianna butted in. Her name was Shannon. Sorry. Her name is Shannon. I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. What happened? Mateo shook his head. We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know? No use in dwelling on it. But that night, we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her. He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent, and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. Then what? He shrugged. Nothing. She was just gone. I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it. I had witnessed it firsthand, and it terrified me. Why doesn't anyone leave? He shrugged for a second time. Can't afford it, or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows. I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it. They cared, of course, it scared them. Especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me anyways. I was a college dropout, and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things. Like, they're coming. Like, I don't want to die. Or even, I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones. It was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that? She said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day, bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found, just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday! As May walked through the door, Matteo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. Jesus Christ. You fuckers know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read Happy Birthday MEY in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. How does it feel? Fucking awful. That's the spirit. Enough of this, Matteo cut in, weaving between them. Let's eat some cake, then let's go. Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually they said they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pre-game, while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Matteo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May, my other shoulder rammed into the car door. Matteo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But it was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots, I followed them out for smoke breaks. I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains, but before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. You never gave me a birthday present, she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice, and then it wasn't. Hey, Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. Arden, where's everybody else? I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. Dunno. Why, what's up? He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. The time, 1:47 a.m. It's getting late, he narrated. Can we find the others and get going? I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Matteo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand, just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street. It happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. Do not interfere. Matteo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when it came when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies, and this neighborhood, right now, was the spider's web. We drove slowly now, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still, we were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knees shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze, all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw, a silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction. And in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent. Help me! Will, Gianna hissed. Turn the car around. Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. Help me, please help. I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice, and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. Maybe, May whispered. Her arm shook against mine. Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us. Deep down it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. He didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. It was so weak. Shannon. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Matteo was the one to break the silence. What? Shannon, he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. That's Shannon. I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs, the girl from Will's phone lock screen. The girl who had disappeared. Shannon. May gasped next to me. Dude, Matteo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car. Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. I have to help her, he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. Help me. Help. Help me please, someone, it hurts. It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. I have to help her, Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Matteo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. Will, that is not Shannon. Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her, but please, please don't do this. Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head, left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Matteo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Matteo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream, but instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off, like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Matteo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light, pulling around the corner. Then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night, I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help. I'm not homeless. I have a home. I just don't own it. But it's mine and I work to keep it. Every city has its fair share of abandoned buildings to squat in, but usually you gotta deal with either cops or shitty neighbors. The Andale high-rise has neither. Police stay away, so do the locals. As a stranger from out of town, I stumbled across the place on my first night in the city, and thought it a little strange that a 28-story tower block had been left to rot. Every window black, every light in the courtyard smashed. No cars in the lot, no booth for a guard, not even barbed wire on the fence. Barely half a mile from a playground filled with shouting drunken teenagers, but none of them strayed in the direction of Andale. No fires or music or bottles hurtling through the air. It was silent. Inside, I found that the lobby had been torn to shit. Double doors ripped open, and left that way for what looked like years. Easy access for the curious, but I was the only one there. Most of the first story had collapsed. Waterlogged ceiling tiles turned to mulch by shitty British weather. I know water is invasive, but it had practically fucking colonized the place, so bad algae was growing up the walls. Even the elevator shaft was flooded. My own reflection looking back at me as I peered through brackish water and caught a glimpse of the old rusted carriage just a few feet below. I couldn't help but think about standing on top of it, waist high, and reaching down to pull open the emergency hatch. Only natural to wonder what was down there. Little metal box soaking in pitch black water for years and years. I thought about pressing the button, calling it up, and seeing the elevator rise in spite of all logic. An image I still think of from time to time. Meanwhile, the empty shaft loomed above, cables whistling in the wind. I've learned not to linger by it. If you look up, you'll sometimes see something ducking out of the way, pulling its head through the doors before you get a good look. It finds it awfully funny, even tries to make a game out of it, like peekaboo. Play too much though, and it starts to pop up elsewhere. Any open door becomes an invitation. Sent more than a few people running for their lives in the middle of the night, but bad news for them. That thing is more than free to leave this place if it's part of a game. If you ask about Andale, most people just shrug or laugh. Kids will talk about it same way they talk about any haunted house. Difference is no one dares anyone to go up there. No one uses it to get pissed or high. No one sneaks into the basement to have a risky little fuck. No one hides their stashes there. It has all the hallmarks of your classic urban legend. Only people actually stay away. They'll laugh and joke and tell scary stories, but they treat the soil it's on like it houses a radioactive leak. And the council, I'm surprised they haven't knocked it down, but they, out of everyone in the city, have the most to lose by talking about it. They built it in the mid-50s as government housing. Only a lot of the young mothers who moved in there found their children's health taking a turn for the worse. Started with newborns. Babies that wouldn't wake after a peaceful night's sleep. The kind of deaths that got written off as either negligence or abuse. Screaming teenage girls hauled off to prison on the words of doctors who didn't give a shit. It's always the mother's fault in some people's eyes, and these girls had no one to stand up for them. 2 in the first year, 4 in the next, and they kept on coming for every year until it closed. It wasn't until 1982 that someone traced the source of deaths to tainted water storage on the roof. Toxic metals leaching into the supply. Not enough to kill an adult, but bad news for anyone with weak immune systems. 38 women had been imprisoned by then. Another 23 had killed themselves before they could be sentenced. And those are just the ones accounted for. Not all the deaths were from the water. Andale has a way of being bad for any child's health, no matter the circumstance. More than a few toddlers starved to death as their parents rotted in the tub from an overdose. Even more were lost when they found their parents' stash, little bodies racked with agonizing fits as their panicked mothers screamed for help. One tripped down the elevator shaft because the doors opened as if the carriage was right there. And those are the ones who were found. Plenty more went missing, written off as runaways. In the end, Andale's reputation as a cursed place got so bad the only way out was to shut the whole thing down. Board it up. Erase it from the records. Pretend it never happened, and just forget. But Andale kept on killing, even after the doors were officially shut. If anything, it only got nastier. Talked to one cop who told me he found a guy dead from sepsis on the 6th floor couple years after the place was shut down. No one could fucking believe it. They reckon this guy scratched himself on a nail and caught gangrene like it was the 1800s. Never went to the hospital. Just laid there and died slowly and painfully as the infection spread, but not before he took every last bit of furniture in the room and shoved it against the door. Strange enough on its own, but it was the flag he'd made out of his own clothes that freaked everyone out. He'd scrawled help on it, like he wanted to get someone's attention down below, even though the lock was on his side. He could have left any time he wanted. Cop I spoke to said he was there when they kicked the door down. Still remembers the look in dead man's eyes. He was glaring at the door 2 days after he'd passed, white-knuckled fists gripping a blanket that smelled sickly sweet from all that infection. There were others too. Lots of people falling, many of them without a good reason. Got so bad they bricked the roof door, but by the time I arrived someone had cleared it all away with a sledgehammer. I still don't hang out up there. Not after I first went up and saw pale fingers gripping the ledge, like someone was hanging off it and holding on for dear life. I reckon a lot of people see something like that and think a person needs their help. They go rushing over to offer a hand. But when I saw it, something about those grimy nails set alarm bells off in my head. Fingers looked all wrong. So I took my coat off and used a broom handle to move it closer to the ledge. Sure enough, those ugly hands snatched at the coat and ripped it out of my hands, sending it hurtling to the parking lot below. I've thought about taking a closer look from time to time, but I got a thing about heights and could never bring myself to investigate it much further. You'd think I'd leave, but it's my home. I own it as much as it owns me. People even refer to me as the caretaker now, like they forgot I wasn't always here. Police treat me the same. Can you believe that? Any reports of a break-in, and they call me on my number to go take a look, like I'm some sort of official. Only other guy who was here as long as me was the philosopher. I don't know his name, just call him that because of the books he left behind. He came here back when the block was still just a place to live, and he stuck around for a few years after its closure. Lots of notebooks in his flat. Thousands of pages talking about child sacrifice made to gods who don't like being named, along with pictures of strange things frozen in ice and medical photos that look fake. At first I thought he came to document the curse. He has dozens of books just recording all the strange things he saw, like birds with too many wings or milk that turned to clotted blood in the bottle. But after going through everything he owned, I found letters to a wife who'd died in childbirth. He kept her death certificate way at the back of an old-looking box filled with the letters he'd kept writing her long after the date. Another box, just a row over, had the letters she'd written back. Awful things scrawled on random scraps, shit and blood for ink. He dated them himself, and sometimes wrote notes about how they came to him. Delivered by a rat that was cannibalized in front of me. Pulled by my dentist from a cavity in my mouth. Written in the web of a spider with 13 legs. Anyway, he gives away the real reason he moved to Andale in one of the letters. Says that Andale was the key to helping her, that he was weeks away from figuring out how to open the door. Told his wife he'd bring her back. Told her he knew how. I've never figured out where he went next or what happened to him. But his apartment was locked when I found it, and likely would have stayed that way if the key hadn't turned up in my inside pocket on the first morning. Now I live in his old place. It's safe in there. He's written things on the wall that keep everything well behaved. Symbols that I don't understand, but which are easy to trace, so that's what I do. I go over them every couple of months, and so far they've kept me safe and sane. Because you do need protection in Andale. I don't know when in its history the curse went from something mundane to something very real and very dark. It wasn't all just bad luck or poverty, not by the end and certainly not anymore. You can't just go strolling around Andale, certainly not at night. It's dangerous. For one thing, it attracts a constant rotation of the deeply unwell who are likely to attack on sight, if you're lucky. They usually turn up dead in the halls come morning, although sometimes it's just bits of them that I come across. Strips of skin floating on the brackish water that floods the basement stairwell, or bloodied fingernails embedded in the ceiling plaster. Weirdest one was a single tooth in a light bulb, bloody gums still attached to the root, the glass all around it somehow intact. Many of them come here with business, something a little like the philosophers. Rituals, bargains, things like that. It's not a good idea to interrupt them, or to give them even the slightest hint you might be a problem. Every night I lock my door and wait for Andale's business to finish, and come morning I do a sweep, floor by floor, and clean up whatever's left of the tower block's strange pilgrims. Most of the rituals don't look real to me. In fact, I reckon a lot of people who come here just end up as victims of something or someone else. There are a lot of reasons to stay out of Andale at night, and most of its visitors strike me as a little naive. Most of what I see looks like it got stolen from a bad death metal album. I once found a book called Satanism and Witchcraft in the 21st Century. It's hard to imagine that the secret inner workings of the universe can be found in something with an ISBN number and 3,000 Amazon reviews. Of course, not all attempts at exploiting Andale's energy are so hackneyed. I had one guy turn up at my door and pay me $3,000 in cash just to show him the darkest corner in the building. I wasn't sure what he meant at first. Thought he meant light and shadow. Sort of, he replied when I explained this to him. Darkness like that can be part of it, but I'm looking for a corner. Has to be a right angle or more acute. Ideally more acute. You understand that term, right? He'd seemed arrogant, and that last sentence confirmed as much. Good-looking guy in his late 20s, nice suit. Looked like the stereotypical banker. Acted like one too. Plenty of places like that, I said. Lots of funny rooms in Andale. People trying to make the most of limited space. Sometimes the walls meet at tight angles, sure. But I don't know what you mean about dark. There's the basement. It's flooded. Can't think of anywhere darker than that. He bit his lip and hesitated for a second or two, as if he was actually contemplating it. Not a bad suggestion actually, but no, too difficult to reach. And I don't just mean dark as in the absence of light. I mean dark like under the bed. Dark like that one chip in a wall that leads to a hollow space between the bricks. And as a child you can't help but wonder what lives there. Somewhere that just inexplicably feels like it's not got as much of God's attention on it as everywhere else. I thought about this for a second. His words were vague, but damn if I didn't know what he meant. A corner? I asked. Has to be an acute corner. He nodded. I think I know the place, I said, and he smiled like real creep. I took him to a flat on the 8th floor. It was run down like everywhere else, but there was still enough of its old furniture lying around. You can pull open random drawers in there and still see the cutlery people once used. There's even an old analog TV on an old stand. You can perch on what's left of the sofa and stare at that TV and get the feeling you knew the people who lived there once. Run your thumb over the dials on the toaster, the handle of the fridge, or the yellowing plastic of a light switch, and feel an aching loss that creeps up on you out of nowhere. Look up, and you'll see that the light fixture has been torn out of the ceiling, like someone had tried swinging from it. Not a big place, by the way. 3 rooms. A bedroom with a double bed all rumpled up. A living room/kitchen. And a tiny little spare room that looked like it once would have been used for storage, or a washing machine maybe, if you were single and childless. A slither of space, a triangle carved out of whatever room was left over when other more important walls had been put up. That sofa I mentioned, the TV, they were all placed so whoever was sat down could always keep an eye on that room and its contents. You see, they'd put a cot inside and it's still there, bluebottle flies circling overhead. You can't see inside the cot, not unless you went in and actually pulled the blankets out, but it's been decades and no one has managed it yet. It's dark behind those old blankets, a heavy shadow that dissuades a closer look, like there's something in there no one needs to see, and it's spent a long time sat there eating what little light there was. Even with a window in that room, daylight doesn't really filter down. Perfect, the businessman said when he saw it. He gazed around the flat one detail at a time, his head pausing for a moment and a smile creeping across his face as he laid his eyes on the broken light fixture. And the cot, the sight of it, the flies that still circled above faded Winnie the Pooh blankets, it made the breath catch in his throat. Oh, this is good, he told me. Dark like under the bed. You've earned that money. I could have had a dozen men sweep this place, and they wouldn't have understood the brief as well as you have. Thank you, I replied, even if that wasn't really how I felt. Quietly the man sat down and began to unpack his leather satchel. No pentagrams to be found, although he did unpack 7 strange-looking candles. He caught me looking at them and smiled. Homemade, he said, each one shaped by my hands. I'm not a good artist, but it's the effort that counts. Took forever to rend the wax. Of course that was the easy part. The hard part was getting the fat to make it. Did you know there can be a surprisingly high level of security around a hospital's medical waste department? I didn't. I replied as he took out some flimsy bits of wood and a few small nails. He oh so carefully began to nail the splinters of wood together into what looked like random shapes. Oh well, he sighed after a few quiet moments, his fingers nimbly gripping the tiny hammer as he tapped away. Already he'd put together at least 6 of the strange little wooden polygons, and with each new one I felt a strange sensation. "Would you like to stay and watch?" he asked. "Absolutely not," I answered. He stopped tapping and smiled once more. "Oh, you're clever," he said. "That's the correct answer, by the way. And if I'm to respect it, I should inform you that now is the safest time to leave." I made my way to the exit just as he lit the first candles, but not before I looked towards the cot one last time. I was surprised to see a hollow blackness that extended beyond the doorway, like a curtain had been draped across it. Only there was depth to it that drew the eye. The businessman paid it no attention, but after a few more seconds he eventually looked up at me expectantly. "Can I ask what is it you want?" I said. "Everyone who comes here, I don't get the sense it ever works out for them." "I'm looking for a new kind of afterlife," he replied. "Do you need one?" "We all need one," he said with a wry chuckle. "But only those of us willing to take a few risks will get a better deal. Everyone else," he grimaced. "It's worth the bother. But look who I'm speaking to." He looked to the darkness that enveloped the doorway. Shapes could be seen floating past. "You should leave now," he said. I pulled the door shut and, noticing that the sun was rapidly setting, ran to my apartment where I knew the walls would keep me safe. When I returned the next day, the man's satchel was still where I'd last seen it, propped against one arm of the sofa. The candles had burned down to the very end of the wicks and left a lingering smell that's still there all these years later. And of the man himself, well, in the room with the cot, which still has bluebottle flies orbiting overhead, there is now a shadow burned into the wall. It's blurry and diffused, but vaguely recognizable as a man on his knees, his head pressed to the floor in a gesture of supplication. I've known it to occasionally move, to turn its head and look towards me, at which point my temples throb, my ears pop, and a darkness begins to encroach upon the edges of my vision. I never exactly considered that flat to be Disneyland before, but now I avoid it like the plague. Still, it could be worse. Not every ritual ends so cleanly, and at times I've had to personally intervene, something I hate bitterly. If people want to go poking around in the universe's undercarriage, that's their business. It's one thing if I've got to sweep what's left of them up afterwards, but at least that's a one-and-done job. Sometimes it isn't so clean. One guy turned up and told me he'd be a new resident, my neighbor, and we'd get to know each other. A bumbling old man with an upper-class accent, and the look of a professor who was down on his luck. He set up in the room next to mine, and no matter how little I spoke to him, he never really got the hint, and kept trying to act like a good friend. Few times I did initiate conversation. It was to tell him the place he'd chosen didn't have much in the way of protection. He pointed to some funny little rashes, and told me they were his protection. Over the next few weeks I'd bump into him from time to time, always on his hands and knees, scraping some dank corner or moldy pile of bumpy growths. He collected fungi, told me on the first day, and I'd often see him wiping his samples onto petri dishes that he whispered quiet words to whenever he thought I wasn't around. I don't think he was sane, but he probably wasn't completely barmy because he lived long enough to get a sense of Andale and only come out in the day. Meanwhile, his apartment filled up with a growing collection of chittering terrariums and pickle jars, their specimens hidden by murky fluids. All over, he planted and cultivated strange mushrooms and molds, encouraged them to soak up the darkness of Andale, and set them to grow in the rife conditions he'd cultivated. Towards the end, his living room had mushrooms growing out the walls, plaster crumbling beneath microbial armies until there was only concrete and rebar, and even then mold continued to grow and thrive. A few times I peered in and found him feeding meat to the frilly growths that exploded out of the old furniture. During this time, the symbols on our shared wall would often grow hot, and I found myself having to replace them on a nearly daily basis as he tinkered away on the other side. I asked him once or twice to tone it down. "This is important work," he growled, an unseen darkness creeping into his voice. "I'm not some ditzy crackhead trying to summon the Baphomet. I'm not looking to get high. This is science. Progress. That is what I am working towards. Yet while your progress is trying to eat its way into my flat, can you ask it to stop?" He stopped, frozen mid-gesture like I'd said something either profoundly stupid or insightful, or likely a bit of both. He looked at the rashes on his arms that had, by now, started to sprout some of their own strange fruit. When he finally spoke again, it was sly, like a lecherous old man propositioning a nurse. "This fungi," he said. "They had samples of it in the university for 30 years. Can you imagine? They never even realized what they had until I found it and unlocked its potential. Now I've finally found the source, and I can do things no one else thought possible. This entire time my thesis has depended upon the idea that the fungus has a capacity for information processing way beyond anything we've considered before. And your idea is a good one, you know? Asking it just might be an option." He scuttled off without another word, and for the next few days he set about the building like a furious little honeybee in spring, poking and prodding, setting trap after trap, and cleaning them vigorously of any rats or mice he caught. When I did my morning sweeps, I'd find him hovering over Andale's latest victims, scraping what was left of them into transparent bags for his own purposes. "Don't mind me," he'd mutter. "It's worthless to you, but these poor souls could help me achieve great things." This persisted for another month. He no longer scraped mold or mushrooms off old apartments. He became interested only in meat, and by the time it came to an end, I can say confidently that I have never smelled anything worse than the prickly musty odor that wafted out from under his locked door. It became so bad that I began to wonder if I might have to ask for police help and have him removed when, finally, he simply disappeared from Andale's halls. One morning he was there, annoyingly shooing me out of the way as he lowered jars into the flooded basement, and then the next he was gone and Andale's halls were silent once more. But that didn't mean he had moved out. Far from it, actually. It took 2 days before I decided to just go ahead and break his door down. I kicked at it with a short, sharp blow, only to find my leg immediately disappeared through wood that had the texture of sodden cardboard. I freed my foot and tried a different tactic, grabbing the handle and pulling so hard that it simply popped right out of the rancid wooden frame. Free to move, the door swung open with an eerie creak and fetid air, hot and damp, blew out of the room. Inside I found that the man's specimens had gone wild. Terrariums had shattered, their contents spilling outwards. Frogs as large as footballs glared at me from behind furry fronds, and insects with human eyes scuttled away before the amphibians could snatch them up. In one corner, rats had built a hive out of old cardboard, their backs covered with fungal growths that resembled human fingers and other appendages. In another corner, something that looked a little like a black rubber sheet slapped furiously at passing vermin, and it took me a few seconds to realize it was a slime mold. When it finally caught something, it dragged the strange creature squealing into the dark corner where it grew and constricted around its meal like a fist. I stared at it horrified until one by one black orbs unveiled itself from within the strange mass, and I realized it had eyes to stare right back at me. It was a cacophony of god-awful terror, so gripping that it kept me from hearing the muffled noise of a human struggling to speak. Eventually it did reach my ears, and I used my torch to light up the far wall, without having to actually step inside. I found the scientist half grown into the wall. Algae and moss coated him head to toe, so that he was no longer recognizable, but I had to assume it could be no one else. Wide eyes glared at me with terror and pain as nasty little critters nibbled away at what was left of his shins. Meanwhile, strange tendrils probed at his ears and head, never resting for a moment. He kept trying to speak, but the algal growths kept driving their way into his mouth until, one by one, they pushed too far and something snapped. His eyes went wider still, his squeals became hysterical, and his jaw slowly slid further down his chest until it hit the floor with a sodden thump. "Finally made contact?" I asked. An awful idea if I've heard one. What would a mushroom have to say even in the best of circumstances? Let alone one that was grown in the ruins of Andale? I can only assume you never got around to telling it to stay off my wall. Did you? No, you probably had your own reason for doing all of this, and that's what took priority. That made me wonder what it was he'd asked for. As the thought entered my head, I took a quick look around and tried to see if anything particular stood out to me. Something was growing on the sofa that looked strangely human-shaped. It might have been just my imagination, but in the dark it seemed to turn towards me. Meanwhile, the scientist continued to shiver in agony, his eyes focused on me and begging for help. "I'll see what I can do," I said before slamming the door. Something about that strange pile on the sofa had deeply unsettled me. I put the word out, asked for a gun, but got a crossbow instead a few days later. A nervous-looking 16-year-old boy ferried it to my door. I was surprised he'd entered the building, but who knows who'd ordered him to do so. I've acquired a strange sort of respect amongst the locals, and it comes in handy. This boy looked like he would have stamped on my head and robbed me blind any other day, but when he spoke to me he did so with more respect than I ever imagined I deserved. I thanked him, took the crossbow, spent an afternoon practicing with it, and then used it to kill the scientist the next morning. Took a few hits, but in the end one thumped into his forehead and shut down his whimpered moans. I didn't see anything on the sofa this time, at least not anything human-shaped, which I was thankful for. After that it was a simple case of calling the police and beginning a long chain of events that ended with half a dozen men in hazmat suits spraying the room with noxious chemicals. For a while there I'd been worried that they'd find a corpse and ask questions, but by the time anyone actually entered the room, there was nothing left of the scientist save a splotch on the floor. I never did figure out exactly what it was he was after, although it is not uncommon for my morning sweep to turn up a body, or part of, covered in fungal growths. And I have been known to occasionally catch glimpses of a strange person lowering themselves into the floodwater of the elevator shaft. Of course I might just be making connections that aren't really there. All sorts of things live in that water. The entire level is flooded, and if something was down there, it'd have free reign over quite a large space. It's a strange world down there. I should know on account of one visitor who gave me a very bad time. I'll call him the fisherman since he came to Andale because of the flooded basement. Saw a photo that's been circulating around for a while now, if you know where to look. God knows who took it and how, but it shows the flooded stairwell leading to the basement, and beneath the brackish surface is a hand that's all out of proportion. Fingers splayed with perfect symmetry like a starfish. It is reaching up out of the depths and resting gently on the third step below the water. When I first met him, he was sitting happily with his feet over the edge of the flooded shaft, water up to his knees, with a rod and line set up beside him. It was quite a surprise at first, seeing him there with a little fly fishing hat. A chubby but healthy-looking man in his 40s with an egg mayo sandwich in one hand and a phone playing Candy Crush in the other. I called out to him as I approached because, in my experience, startling someone in Andale is bad for your health no matter how sane the visitor appears. He looked up when I caught his attention and smiled amiably. "Hello," he waved with his sandwich. "You're the caretaker?" "Yes, I am," I answered. "And you are?" "Just a tourist," he smiled. "Care to join me?" The sun had risen only moments ago. "You weren't here when it was dark, were you?" I asked, more than a little suspicious. "Oh no, you've only just caught me. Been here barely 10 minutes before you showed up. I was told you'd be willing to help in exchange for a small fee." "What sort of help?" I asked. "Oh, just give me a nudge if any of the lines start moving," he said while pointing to a rod he'd set up beside the basement stairs. The door was propped open, and the line led down into the darkness below, water gently lapping just out of sight. Another line had been set up in a corner of the lobby where the floor had been torn away, revealing a hole straight down into the basement. I can't keep an eye on them all at once, you see. I have bells ready, but, well, 2 heads are better than 1. "What is it exactly you're hoping to catch down there?" I asked. "Are you familiar with the primordial ocean?" he said. "The abyssal waters that God split into light and dark, all that? It's not a physical location, per se, but it does connect to certain bodies of water depending on the time and place. Last recorded manifestation was in a glass of old whiskey underneath a forgotten bar in Mexico City. Some poor fellow knocked it over, and didn't notice until the following day, when half the bar was suddenly underwater. Quickly rectified, but some of the things swimming in that water were something else, and all from at the bottom of a glass no wider than my wrist. Imagine what we can do with this?" he said while gesturing at water by his feet. "You think there could be fish alive down there?" I asked. "At least," he replied. "I'd be willing to pay for any reliable information, of course. Do you have any idea what might be down there?" "Not really," I shrugged. "But I guess it wants to be left alone." "You might be right there," he said while looking at his other rods. "I didn't exactly put down any old lure, you know." He reached into his pocket and took out a strange tuft of fur and ivory, holding it up for me to squint at. A tooth from a man who drowned in the sea. A drone collected it off a shipwreck near the Norwegian coast. The fur is actually red algae that was found growing on his bones. I have plenty of these and, well, other things that might appeal to what's on the other side. My research was thorough and expensive. "Come on, take a seat. Flat fee, 1,000. Just sit here until the sun starts to set." "I just have to sit?" I asked. "And let me know if you hear or see anything." I groaned and sat beside him, folding my legs instead of letting them dangle in the water below. Despite my reticence, We stayed like that for several hours. He brought lots of food, good homemade stuff, along with plenty of cold beer. We sat there and spoke very little, but we did eat and drink a tremendous amount. Not the kind of thing I do normally, but I was being paid to be there, and I didn't really have anywhere else to be. It was, all in told, a very pleasant afternoon, until I fell asleep. When I awoke, it was with a terrible gasp. My chest was tight like something had been sitting on it, and judging from the terrible giggling and scampering feet I heard running off into the darkness, it might not have been just a feeling. Already panic was setting in as my eyes darted to the open doors and saw that the moon was out and had been for hours. I fumbled for my torch, and turning it on saw that there was no sign of the fisherman. All his stuff had been left behind, yet all that remained of him was his hat that still floated on the water. Even as I watched, a smooth glistening shape curled beneath the water and plucked it off the surface. I recoiled and crawled away from it as fast as I could. This was bad. I knew deep in my heart I'd never been as at risk I was in that moment. The open doors that led outside were tempting, but just beside them were the stairs that led downwards, and I swore I could hear something approaching. I couldn't help but picture the fungal man I'd seen in the scientist's flat. Then again, that basement was huge, and who knows what lay down there. I decided to go for the stairs. The entire time my heart was in my chest. I had never been caught outside my room at night, not since my first night when I'd slept in the lobby with my coat pulled over me. You don't get lucky twice, not with Andale, so I knew I had to be careful. I had to be quiet. My only hope was to go unnoticed. I took to stealth, climbing each floor in perfect silence, hiding in well-known spots at the slightest hint of footsteps, human or otherwise. Andale comes alive at night. Whispered mutterings from strange children who descend from air vents, living there for God knows how long. Other times I saw apparitions, including one, a toddler, the sight of whom made my stomach growl with an insatiable hunger that hurt just to contemplate. She stared at me with pleading eyes as I slunk away from her open door. I might have been tempted to help her, were it not for the sight of the moon peering through her translucent image. And yet, despite all this, I somehow made it to the 14th floor alive. Only it was there right at the final hurdle, so close to safety, that I came across something out of my worst nightmare. A woman stood outside my apartment door, silent, pale, dirt-covered fingernails. It was all too often I'd open my door and find muddy impressions on the floor made by a woman's bare feet. Now I knew who left them every night. I couldn't see her face from where I hid, but something about her seemed profoundly familiar. When she finally turned towards me, I remembered. I recognized her, even though most of her face was missing. It was the philosopher's wife. He had succeeded, it seemed, but I couldn't imagine at what god-awful price, because the woman who stared at me had clearly weathered some years in the grave. It was only the poor lighting in her long hair that had covered up just how bad a state she was in. A lipless grin stared back at me below sunken cheekbones and hollow eye sockets. And yet, I could tell that in another life she had been beautiful, which only made the sight all the more gut-wrenching. "My darling," she whispered, and there was something about her voice that I found hard to stay sane in the face of. I don't know why. Over a decade in that place, and I'd borne witness to living nightmares, but it was this walking corpse that pushed me to my limits. The inescapable feeling of loss weighed me down, and without realizing it I found myself taking steps towards her even as my knees buckled. By the time I reached her I was crawling until I could clutch her grimy, icy leg, and that was the last thing I remember before I woke up in my bed the following morning. Everything seemed normal, so completely mundane that I could have written the whole thing off as a bad nightmare. But there were footprints leading from my bed to the door, and later on I found the fisherman's things much as he left them, although when I finally reeled his lines and I found the lures gone and replaced with bits and pieces of the man who'd first set them up, I threw it all into the water below and decided it would be best to forget him. Every now and again, of course, I can't help but check my peephole at night. I never did before that, but now I do. I see her every single time. She looks sad. Hurts me to think of her out there. It ought to be terrifying, but it's more like someone's ripped out my stomach and heart and let all my insides fall out the bottom. Each time I see her, I wonder what exactly was it he did to bring her back. He leaves only one hint. A final letter, I think. It's not like he dated them. In it he says he would give everything to have her in his arms once more. Not only his life, but everything he's already lived. Every sunset, every good dream, every nightmare, every victory, every loss, every little memory that makes him who he is, he'd give it all just to save her. Sometimes I wonder about him, figuring we'd probably be about the same age. I'd like to think back and imagine what it would have been like for the two of us to meet as young men. But for some reason, whenever I try to remember what my life was like before I came to this city, before I woke up with that coat pulled over me, well, I don't know. It's just hard, that's all. It's almost like there's nothing there. Like something reached in and took all the years away. I guess it's just one of those things I'm better off not dwelling on.